In September, a man with bipolar disorder was in complete distress outside of a Melbourne psychiatric hospital. When police stomped on his head, sending him to the ER in a coma. Disturbing incidents like these are the reason mental health training and the reduction of stigma need to be at the forefront of society's concerns. With the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic still lingering across the world, Aussies everywhere continue to experience heightened depression and anxiety. Unfortunately, the negative stereotypes and the stigmatisation of mental illness continue to act as a barrier to those who experience it, preventing them from speaking out and seeking the appropriate help. The media plays a large role in the formation of our attitudes and perceptions, especially towards different groups in society. Today we're here to find out, is the media hurting our perception of people with mental illness? Are news outlets specifically responsible, or are film and television portrayals just as influential? I've conducted an interview with the head psychologist at Direct Focus Solutions, Rebecca Malia Blanco. With approximately 20 years of experience in the industry, she's here to give us her insights on the way stigma can impact people with mental health issues. Hi Rebecca, thanks for coming on the show. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Starting off with mental illness, I mainly worked with people who had had strokes, brain injury, and the associated deficits that come with that. But also people present with, various psychosocial issues, dilemmas that they need a lot of help with. So it's a lot of reactive depression based on that psychosocial issue.
So basically in this podcast, we're talking about the way that stigma can generate a fear of people with mental illness, and, the way that the media representation also feeds into that fear. So I wanted to ask you about whether any of your patients have ever come to you expressing their worries about the way that stigma impacts them, whether it be, maybe how they see themselves, or maybe if it's impacting the way that others treat them.
In terms of when you say the word stigma around mental health, I think what comes up a lot for me is cultural stigma. We are a very multicultural, very diverse country, and a lot of these cultural groups, mental illness is not widely recognised from their countries, and so they come to a society where we actually do recognise mental illness, we do talk about it. It's a bit of a cultural shock for those diverse groups. It's very difficult for them to present for help. Interestingly, not very well represented in the media. I think we when we see people with mental illness in the media, it may be specifically a cultural group that we see, and so it's the diversity that we see in the population is not necessarily reflected in the media.
Okay. It's important to recognise that in some cultures, mental health challenges are often considered a weakness and something to hide. I talked to a couple of Western Sydney University students about their experiences with cultural stigma. Here's what they said.
Mental health is a very untouched and unspoken thing in my family, especially due to the religious background. They are Muslim, and on top of that, East African, they just don't see as something that's real. They would just make you feel like if you ever had these things, like something is wrong with you. I'm just glad our generation's actually speaking up vocally more about it.
I'm from an Egyptian and Sudanese background. Specifically, my religious background is Coptic Orthodox, which is considered almost a minority religion in Egyptian and Sudanese culture. Mental health isn't really discussed much in our culture, and I think it has a lot to do with the fact that people do not like to show vulnerability. And when I mentioned earlier that religion plays into the mental health stigma, I think that there often tends to be a neglect for seeking mental health services or like just psychological help in general, because I think that there is a perception that praying or that God or religion will quote unquote fix the issues. I really don't want to discount religion and how it can help with mental health. But what I'm also saying is that religion, praying, and God isn't the only answer to dealing with mental health.
No one should ever have to struggle alone. Just know that there are a multitude of services out there that can be tailored to exactly what you need in order to get better. Beyond Blue currently offers a coronavirus mental wellbeing support service that allows you to reach out for help via phone call or web chat. So now, let's talk about the representation in the media. How are people with mental illness represented? Here's what Rebecca had to say.
We see a very skewed view or perception of people with mental illness. We specifically do portray people with mental illness in the media as being often quite unpredictable in their behaviour, quite erratic. Sometimes, especially on the news, we see people with mental illness portrayed as dangerous people.
So why do you think the news media continue to portray people with mental illness in this way?
It's sensational. So the news tends to want to report on something that is sensational, but the damage it does in the long term is, very far reaching. They were saying the other day that Kerry Packer was testifying, and obviously I didn't even know he had bipolar, but they said that, it's very apparent and obvious that he's not functioning well.
Oh, okay.
And on Australian Story just the other week, they were sort of talking about one of the very prominent NRL players struggling with bipolar. So once upon a time when it was taboo to actually not even mention that someone had a mental illness, I guess we hear that people have mental illness now, which is destigmatizing it.
So in contrast to that, how do you think film and television handle depictions of mental illness? And do you think they're more or less harmful?
I really like to watch shows that discuss and portray mental illness. I think that film and television are doing it much better, especially sort of some of the stuff that's coming out on Netflix. I think they are specifically trying to do it sensitively.
Do you have any examples maybe of particular films or TV shows that you really liked the portrayals of mental illness in?
Ricky Gervais has done, I think that show might be called Life After Death or something, yeah. And that's a very, very real and accurate portrayal of grief and loss. I see people like that and counsel people like that struggle. Even, for example, there's a show called Fleabag. It's a black comedy.
Yeah.
She clearly has a personality disorder. And it really accurately reflects how this person functions through the world, really just harming and hurting not only herself but everybody around her.
Yeah.
I mean, that is just so, you wouldn't see a show like that, years ago. I think it's so brilliantly done.
Towards the end of the interview, Rebecca gave us some parting words. She talked about what she thinks are the best remedies for the reduction of stigma and how we can be more understanding as a society.
It comes back to a reduction in these incidences from police and the people dealing with these incidences being better educated. It comes back to better education of those people on the ground. And I think we've got a long way to go yet. So working with society to better educate, working with society to better train. If people can do better, they will do better. The more that we can educate and have a soft heart in regards to the way that we approach people that are unwell, we can improve the way that we approach people that are unwell.
And if you'd like to learn more about what Rebecca does, you can go to directfocussolutions.com.au. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week on Under the Umbrella.